Happy Tuesday, readers. Today we're going to continue to work in our reading notebook using the story, The Tiger Rising. Remember, Mrs. Ling has her own copy, but you have a digital copy that's attached to the bottom of this lesson, and you're going to need your book packet that you'll work on a little bit later. We do not have a teach page that we're inserting today. We're going to be writing some notes for ourselves. So if you would, go ahead and look in your notebook. We're going to turn back to yesterday's lesson. Yesterday's lesson, we were creating defensible ideas about our characters by identifying the character that we were zooming closer and looking at, taking a closer look at the actions or the text evidence, and then trying to determine, well, what does this reveal about my character? Why might they act this way? And then does this start showing us a pattern of the character's actions? So telling us a little bit more about who they are as a character. We then turned the page and we were taking notes about how can we grow ideas about our characters by noting patterns in the character's actions, using them to form those ideas about the character. We asked ourselves, how do the character's new actions fit with or change those ideas? And why might the character act this way? So we're going to continue working today, and we're going to write page 38 and then turning back in your table of contents. So we're continuing on with our lessons about interpreting our characters by digging deeper. And today's lesson is titled Developing Significant Ideas. Remember that you may pause the video at any time to get caught up, and then push play when you're ready to move on. So we're going to go ahead and turn back to today's page. And I believe it was on page 38. Let me just double check. Yes. All right, before we begin, we're just going to talk a little bit about how we are going to be working on our lesson today. For a minute, let's think about expert judges of dogs. How many of you have watched a dog show on TV? If you have pretended to be that judge to select which dog is the best, you might be just like Mrs. Ling. For me, what inevitably happens is that I'm still checking out a dog's coat or shape or proportions when suddenly the judge signals, "Walk him," and then the judge quickly moves on to the next dog. I just can't keep up. But Malcolm Gladwell's point is that expert dog watchers can make judgments in the blink of an eye because of this. They know which features merit attention. They don't have to give equal attention to all the parts of a subject, all the details about a character, the way non-experts do. And so today, I want to help you become a discerning judge, not of dogs, but of details of a story. Today, I want to teach you that if readers pay attention to details that shows characters' desires, the obstacles they encounter, and the ways they respond to the obstacles, they are likely to gain insight into both the characters themselves and the stories. Before we begin, we're going to go ahead and add a new point to our Grow Ideas About a Character list. So we're going to go ahead and add a fourth point. And today we're going to learn how to pay attention to a character's desire, I'm going to underline that, and how they are achieved. Period. So we're going to pay attention to a character's desire and how they are achieved. So we're going to underline the how as well. So you have all probably written stories and remember what a story arc is. If you're not sure, story arc is a pattern that explains how stories tend to go. Right now, it might bring to mind a fairy tale like take the Three Billy Goats Gruff. Remember how in that story goes? The goats want to cross a bridge to eat grass on the other side, but a troll threatens to eat them. Each of the goat tricks the troll, promising that the next one, the bigger goat, has a meal if the troll allows him to pass. The last and biggest goat pushes the troll into the water. It's in this way all three make it to the other side. When you listen to that story, you're reminded of that fairy tale. We are then reminded of an arc. In the story, there is a main character or two or three who has desires that lead him or her to go after something. And that effort becomes a big part of the story arc. Does that fit with the Three Billy Goats Gruff? Yes, the goats want to cross the bridge to eat grass, and then they encounter trouble. The troll wants to eat them. The goats have to try to reach the goal. And in this case, they cross the bridge safely to eat the grass, which they do by tricking the troll. So let me add this tip. The important details in a story are often the details that helped develop that story arc. Here's how we're going to focus. We're going to revisit a scene in The Tiger Rising, the one at the end of chapter 6. So you are able to use your digital copy, or you can listen to Mrs. Ling and pay attention. As I read, I want you to think about Rob and what he wants. I want you to think of, what does he desire? Think about that deep down motivation that drives Rob, and think also about the obstacles that get in his way of getting into what he wants deep down. And finally, think about how he responds to those obstacles. So we're going to look at this passage, and it says, in a minute, the faded red double doors of the lunchroom swung open and Sistine Bailey came marching through them, her head held high. Behind her was a whole group of kids, and just when Sistine noticed Rob sitting there on the bench, one of the kids threw something at her. Rob couldn't tell what it was, but it hit her, whatever it was. Run! He wanted to yell at her. Hurry up and run! But he didn't say anything. He knew better than to say anything. He just sat there and stared at Sistine with his mouth open, and she stared back at him. Then she turned and walked back into the group of kids like somebody walking into deep water. It's so interesting that he wanted to say something but didn't. Why is that important part of the story? What does it show me about this character? You might be thinking that it might show that he really wanted to help Sistine. When he wanted to yell, run, hurry up and run. This might show you what he wants. Do you agree? You might be thinking that this main character's motivation is to help Sistine. This is really important because, and then I want you to think about, well, what does it tell you about Rob and who he is? What's the problem or obstacle he encounters? Earlier we said it pays off to think not only about a character's motivation, but also about the obstacle to those motivations. And oftentimes as readers, we have to find the text evidence to support what obstacles get in the way of our character's desires. So you might be looking back in your text to look at the passage that says, but he didn't say anything. He knew better than to say anything. He just sat and stared at Sistine with his mouth open, and she stared back at him. Then she turned and walked back into the group of kids like somebody walking into deep water. Sometimes when you read one passage in a book, questions will come up that you can't answer by looking at just one page. You might need to develop an idea because it's helpful to think about several parts of the book. Why doesn't Rob actually say those words to Sistine instead of just thinking them? Are there other times where Rob seemed frozen and unable to talk back to things that have happened to him? I want you to think a moment about what has happened so far in our story. And are there other examples of times when Rob has acted this way? You're looking for the patterns to tell us what this might reveal about who our character of Rob is. Readers, we could have noticed details about the lunchroom, that it had red, faded double doors, and sometimes the text will cue us that the setting is important. But almost all of the time when reading fiction, you can count on the fact that it will pay off for you to focus on the protagonist's motivation, deep down and on the obstacles that he or she encounters. Readers, think about the main characters in the book that you're reading independently. If you're starting a new book, think about the last book that you read. What does your character in your book desire? Does the character have a mission? Sometimes that motivates him or her to act in a certain way. Take a minute to think about that. Now think back over the parts of the story you've read so far. What or who is getting in the way of your character's desires? What obstacles or challenge is preventing you or your character from getting this big thing he or she wants? Readers, it is always important to ground your ideas in the book. When you go off to read independently later, I know you'll be especially alert to significant details, one that show not only how a character's actions are a window into what kind of person he or she really is, but also that these actions can explain what the character desires and the obstacles that stand in the way. And I know you'll continue to notice patterns in the character's actions and things that break out of those patterns. Today, as you know, details that seem significant, I want you to think, does this explain what my character desires? Does it reveal obstacles or challenges that the character needs to overcome? Does it show the resolution? Today, we're going to be reading one more passage in our book. We're going to be moving on to chapter 7 on page 23. Let's reread and first do the kind of work that you might be doing in your own books during your independent reading. So we're going to be thinking back about our characters. And in this part of The Tiger Rising, this is when Rob and Sistine see each other for the first time on the bus. And after he tells the group of kids to leave Sistine alone, this is the first real conversation when Sistine sits next to him on the bus and they learn each other's names. "I hate it here," she said, looking away from him, her voice even deeper than before. "This is a stupid hick town with stupid hick teachers. Nobody in the whole school even knows what the Sistine Chapel is." "I know," said Rob. "I know what the Sistine Chapel is." Immediately, he regretted saying it. It was his policy not to say things, but it was a policy he was having a hard time maintaining around Sistine. "I bet," Sistine sneered at him. "I bet you know." "It's a picture of God making the world," he said. Sistine stared at him hard. She narrowed her small eyes until they almost disappeared. Now practice coming up with an idea, not just a retelling. Think about the question, what are my thoughts about what just happened? And here's a tip. You can nudge yourself to grow ideas by using phrases such as, "this is important because," or "this makes me realize," or even, "the bigger idea here is." So we're going to do this together. Rob just told Sistine that he knows what her name means. Let's go ahead to our notebook and we're going to write our title, Developing Significant Ideas. So we're going to use some of our statements or our sentence stems to help us to grow our ideas about our character. So we're going to go ahead and write the first one of, "I'm realizing that." And we're going to fill it in with some information about what we've read. So I want you to think about, what does this section of the passage tell us about Rob? What are his desires and what obstacles are getting in his way? You might be thinking, how is he changing from what we knew originally from the story? So we're going to say that Sistine told Rob about how much she hates the town in this section, and Rob told Sistine he knows what the Sistine Chapel is, and they're kind of talking like friends. So Rob might be starting to change because he wants to be Sistine's friend, and he's starting to open up. So we have to think about, how could we record this to show our thinking about our character? So I'm realizing that Rob is opening up to Sistine and that shows that he is changing by not keeping his thoughts to himself, period. So we're writing, I'm realizing that Rob is opening up to Sistine, and that shows that he is changing by not keeping his thoughts to himself. I think this shows his desire to be her friend and share his thoughts with her. So we have to think about, when we're presented with actions of our characters, we have to think of, why is our character acting this way? What does this reveal about our character? But more importantly, how is this changing our character? So as we finish up our statement about what we have found in the details about Rob and his interactions with Sistine, I want you to remember that today we were talking about the importance of paying attention to details that show our characters' desires, the obstacles that they might encounter, and the ways they respond to those obstacles. You're likely to gain more insight into both the characters themselves and the overall story. Today for your classwork, you're going to be finishing up in your book packet the pages for chapters 11 through 15. So yesterday you were asked to start your work for chapters 11 through 15, which starts on page 9. You had more dictionary detective work, vocabulary study, understanding the story, and finally on page 12, your chapter summary. Please remember that you were asked to complete this yesterday and today, and you will be given more time during your read aloud section today.